The letter trembled in Sarah Vaughn's hands as she sat alone at the worn table in the corner of the dusty saloon, her pen scratching across paper while tears blurred her vision. And she had no idea the solitary cowboy watching from across the room would change everything she thought she knew about loneliness. It was 1889 in Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory, barely a week after the famous land run that had transformed empty prairie into a bustling town of canvas tents and hastily built wooden structures. Sarah had come here with her uncle's family, full of hope for a new start, but cholera had taken them all within 3 days of their arrival. At 19 years old, she found herself completely alone in a raw frontier town, working serving tables in the Red River Saloon just to keep herself fed and housed in the small room upstairs that the owner allowed her to rent for almost nothing because he pitied her situation. Every evening after her shift ended, Sarah would sit at the corner table with her precious writing paper and pen, composing letters to her mother and sister back in Missouri. The letters were her only connection to home, her only comfort in this strange and often frightening place where gunshots rang out at all hours and men fought over land claims in the muddy streets. Lucas Wright had been watching the young woman with the chestnut hair for 3 evenings now. He came to the saloon not for whiskey or cards like most men, but because it was warmer than his tent on the edge of town, and because seeing other people reminded him he was still human after 2 years of riding alone through cattle country. At 25, he had worked ranches from Texas to Montana, saved his money carefully, and had finally claimed his own 160 acres in the land run. But what was the point of land if you had no one to share it with? He noticed everything about her. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she concentrated on her writing. The occasional tear that would fall onto the paper, making her dab at it carefully with her sleeve. The protective way she held herself when rowdy customers got too close. The sadness that seemed to emanate from her like heat from a stove. On the 4th evening, Lucas gathered his courage and approached her table. He stood there awkwardly, hat in his hands, until she looked up with those red-rimmed eyes. "Pardon me, miss," he said quietly, his deep voice barely audible over the piano music. "I do not mean to intrude, but I have watched you writing these past few nights, and I wondered if you might be willing to help me with something." Sarah tensed, preparing for whatever inappropriate request was coming. Men in saloons always wanted something, but Lucas continued, his weathered face coloring slightly with embarrassment. "I cannot write very well myself, never had much schooling. But I have a sister back in Tennessee who I have not contacted in near 3 years, and I reckon she probably thinks I am dead. Would you consider writing a letter for me? I can pay you, of course." The genuine loneliness in his voice touched something deep in Sarah's heart. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit down. I would be happy to help you, and there is no need for payment." Lucas sat carefully, as if afraid the chair might break under his solid frame. He was tall, she noticed, with broad shoulders built from hard work. His brown hair was overlong and sun-streaked, his face tanned and lined from years outdoors. But his eyes were kind, a warm hazel color that seemed to hold depths of unspoken sadness. "I am Lucas Wright," he offered, still turning his hat in his hands. "Sarah Vaughn." She dipped her pen in the ink bottle. "What would you like to say to your sister?" For the next hour, Lucas spoke haltingly about his life, about leaving home after their parents died, about the ranches he had worked, about finally having his own land. Sarah's pen flew across the paper, translating his rough words into flowing sentences. She asked questions that drew out more details, helping him express feelings he did not know he had words for. When she finished reading the letter back to him, Lucas sat in stunned silence. That is exactly what I wanted to say, only better. How did you do that? Sarah smiled for the first time in days. I just listened to what you meant, not just what you said. You have a true gift, Miss Vaughn. He pulled some coins from his pocket. Please let me pay you something. No, she said firmly, folding the letter carefully. It was my pleasure. Writing to someone who actually wants to hear from you is different from writing letters that may never even be read. The pain in her voice made Lucas lean forward. You write to folks who do not write back. My mother and sister, Sarah admitted. I send letters every week, but I have not heard from them since I arrived here. The mail service is unreliable at best, and I worry they think I have abandoned them. Or perhaps they believe I perished with my uncle and his family in the cholera outbreak. You lost family to cholera? Lucas asked gently. The dam broke. Sarah found herself telling this stranger everything. About her Uncle Joseph, who had promised her parents he would give her a better life out west. About her cousin Margaret, who had been her age and had become like a sister. About arriving in Guthrie full of excitement and watching everyone she came with die within days. About being utterly alone except for these letters she sent home, desperate to maintain some connection to the only family she had left. Lucas listened without interrupting, his heart breaking for her. When she finally fell silent, wiping her eyes, he spoke carefully. Miss Vaughn, I know we just met, but I want you to know you are not alone in this town. I do not have much, just a tent and a land claim that is mostly prairie grass right now, but I would be honored if you would consider me a friend. And I meant what I said about your gift for writing. If you would be willing to write more letters for me, I would be grateful. Not just to my sister, but maybe to some of the ranch owners I worked for, maintaining those connections. I would like that, Sarah said softly, and I would appreciate having a friend. From that night forward, Lucas came to the saloon every evening after Sarah finished her shift. She would write letters for him, sometimes to his sister, sometimes to former employers, occasionally to distant cousins he barely knew. But they both understood the letters were just an excuse. What they really looked forward to was the conversation. Sarah learned that Lucas had left Tennessee at 18 after both parents died of influenza within a month of each other. His sister Harriet had married a store owner and was settled with children, but Lucas had felt the pull westward. He had spent 7 years working cattle drives and ranches, learning everything he could about raising livestock and working land. He was quiet but not shy, thoughtful but not slow, and possessed a dry sense of humor that made Sarah laugh when she had thought she might never laugh again. Lucas discovered that Sarah had grown up in a small Missouri town, where her father had been a schoolteacher before consumption took him 5 years earlier. Her mother and younger sister Emily had struggled to make ends meet, which was why Sarah had agreed to come west with her uncle's family when he offered. She loved reading and writing, had a quick mind for numbers, and could recite poetry from memory. She was gentle but not weak, kind but not naive, and her rare smiles made Lucas's heart hammer in his chest. 2 weeks into their friendship, Lucas arrived at the saloon with a proposal that had nothing to do with letters. Miss Vaughn, I have been thinking. You have been writing for me all this time, taking time away from your own letter writing. What if you came out to my land claim on Sunday afternoon? I could show you what I am building, and you could have some peace and quiet to write your own letters. It is beautiful country, and I promise to be a perfect gentleman. Sarah hesitated. Going alone with a man to an isolated place was improper and potentially dangerous, but something in Lucas's honest face made her trust him. I would like that very much, Mr. Wright. Lucas, he corrected gently, please. Then you must call me Sarah. That Sunday, Lucas arrived with a borrowed wagon and horse. Sarah wore her best dress, which was not saying much since she owned only 3 and they had all seen better days. But Lucas looked at her like she was wearing silk and diamonds. The ride out to his claim took 30 minutes, following rough trails across rolling prairie. The late spring day was perfect, warm but not hot, with wildflowers blooming in patches of purple and yellow across the grass. Sarah breathed deeply, realizing she had not left the crowded, dirty town since arriving weeks ago. "This is it," Lucas said as they crested a small rise. Below them stretched a valley with a creek running through it, cottonwood trees clustered along the water. He had already erected a small frame for what would eventually be a house, and a rough corral held 2 horses. "Lucas, it is beautiful," Sarah breathed. His face lit up with pride. "You really think so? I know it is not much yet, but I have plans." A house right there on that slight elevation, good drainage, barn near the creek for the livestock. I am thinking cattle primarily, maybe some horses. The soil is rich enough for a kitchen garden and some crops. They spent the afternoon walking the land while Lucas pointed out his vision for the future. His enthusiasm was infectious. Sarah could see it all through his eyes. The house with a wide porch, the barn, cattle grazing on the hills, maybe children playing near the creek someday. The thought made her blush and look away. Lucas noticed everything about her reactions. The way her face softened when she looked at the flowers, the happiness in her eyes when she spotted a meadowlark, the wistfulness when he mentioned children. They sat by the creek on a blanket he had brought, and Sarah pulled out her writing materials. But instead of writing, she found herself just talking with Lucas about everything and nothing. He told her about cattle drives, about sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled sugar, about the loneliness of the trail. She told him about her father's books, about helping her mother tend their garden, about missing her sister so much it physically hurt. As the sun began lowering, Lucas drove her back to town, and they were both quieter than usual. "Sarah," he said as they reached the saloon, "I know this is forward of me, but would you consider coming to my claim again next Sunday, and maybe the Sunday after that?" "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." Their Sunday visits became the highlight of both their weeks. Lucas worked himself nearly to exhaustion Monday through Saturday, building his house board by board, working odd jobs in town to earn money for supplies, tending his small herd of cattle he had purchased with most of his savings. But Sunday was for Sarah. He began to plan for those days. He would pack simple picnics of bread and cheese and apples. He built a rough bench by the creek where she could sit comfortably. He brought her wildflowers, feeling foolish but unable to stop himself. Sarah found herself thinking about Lucas constantly. While serving drinks and dodging wandering hands in the saloon, she would remember his gentle smile. While lying in her narrow bed at night, she would recall the sound of his laugh. She began to dread the end of each Sunday, counting the days until the next one. The other saloon girls noticed and teased her mercilessly. Emma, who had been kind to Sarah since her first day, cornered her one morning. "That cowboy of yours is a good man," Emma said. "Treats you right. Do not let him slip away, honey. Good men are scarcer than gold nuggets out here." "He is not my cowboy," Sarah protested, but even she could hear how weak the denial sounded. One evening in early June, nearly 2 months after they had met, Lucas came to the saloon looking troubled. He waited until Sarah's shift ended, then approached her table where she was beginning her nightly letter writing. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important," he said without preamble. "But first, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart clenched with worry. "What is it?" "These letters I have been asking you to write. They are real and I do send them, but that is not why I started coming here." He took a deep breath. I started talking to you because I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and because you looked so sad that I wanted to know why. I kept coming back because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Sarah's pen clattered to the table. "Lucas." "Wait, please let me finish," he rushed on. "I know I do not have much to offer. Just a half-built house and a land claim and more work ahead than most men could imagine. But I work hard, and I am honest, and I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you would give me the chance. Sarah Vaughn, would you consider marrying me?" The saloon noise faded away. Sarah stared at this good, kind man who had somehow become essential to her happiness. "You love me, with everything I am," Lucas said simply. "I love you too," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I have for weeks now. I was afraid to say anything, afraid I was wrong about how you felt." Lucas reached across the table and took her hands, his work-roughened fingers gentle on her skin. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," Sarah laughed through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The whole saloon erupted in cheers. Apparently their courtship had been far less subtle than either of them thought. Emma was crying and hugging Sarah. Even the bartender was grinning and offering drinks on the house. But Sarah and Lucas only had eyes for each other. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Guthrie. Sarah wore a dress that Emma and the other saloon girls helped her make from fabric Lucas bought at the general store. Lucas wore new trousers and a clean shirt, his hair freshly cut. They had no family present, but half the town showed up anyway, happy to celebrate something joyful in a place where hardship was the norm. Sarah moved into Lucas's tent that night, and they began their married life with nothing but each other and the land stretching around them. The reality of frontier life hit hard. Lucas's land claim was miles from town, isolating Sarah from the few friends she had made. The tent was sweltering in the June heat and leaked when it rained. Water had to be hauled from the creek, cooking was done over an open fire, and every task took 3 times longer than it would have in a proper house. But Sarah had never been happier. She woke each morning to Lucas's arms around her. They worked side by side, Sarah helping where she could with the building while Lucas taught her about cattle and horses and land. In the evenings, they would sit by their fire and talk for hours. Sometimes Sarah read aloud from the few books they owned. Sometimes Lucas told her stories from his years on the trail. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sarah continued writing her letters home, and now she had so much more to tell. She wrote about Lucas, about their land, about her hopes for their future. She still had not received any reply, which worried her, but Lucas encouraged her to keep writing. "Maybe the letters are not getting through," he suggested. "Or maybe your mother is angry that you married without telling her first. But she is your family, Sarah. Keep trying." In July, the house was far enough along that they could move in, though it still lacked windows and had only a dirt floor. But it had walls and a roof, and a real fireplace Lucas had built stone by stone. Sarah cried when she saw the surprise he had added a desk built into one corner specifically for her writing. "Every house needs a place for the woman to do her work," Lucas said, looking embarrassed. "Figured your writing was important to you." Sarah threw her arms around him. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Far from it," Lucas laughed. "But I am trying to be perfect for you." By August, they had fallen into a rhythm. Lucas worked the land and tended the cattle while Sarah managed the house, such as it was. She planted a garden that actually grew, amazing herself. She learned to cook over the fireplace, to preserve food for winter, to do laundry in the creek. It was back-breaking work, but she did it gladly. One evening, a rider appeared at their door with mail. Sarah's hands shook as she saw the return address Missouri, her mother's handwriting. She tore it open while Lucas watched anxiously. As Sarah read, her face went pale, then red, then crumpled with emotion. Lucas was at her side instantly. "Sarah, what is it? What has happened?" "They thought I was dead," Sarah sobbed. "My letters never reached them. The first few got lost, and when they wrote to Uncle Joseph and got no reply, they assumed we all died in the cholera outbreak. My mother has been in mourning for months. She only found out I was alive last week when the postmaster finally sorted out the mail issues and delivered all my letters at once." Lucas held her while she cried, reading the letter over her shoulder. Sarah's mother expressed overwhelming relief and joy at discovering her daughter alive, but also hurt that Sarah had married without telling them. However, the letter ended with love and blessings, and a plea for Sarah to write more often. There was also a shorter note from Emily, Sarah's younger sister, full of excitement and questions about Sarah's new husband and life. "They want to visit," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Next spring they want to come see us." "Then we better make sure we have a proper house by then," Lucas said, kissing her forehead. "With real windows and a wood floor and maybe even an extra bedroom." "Lucas, we cannot afford all that." "We will find a way," he promised. "I will take extra work over the winter. Maybe hire out to some of the bigger ranches that need help, whatever it takes to make this place worthy of your family visiting." Sarah kissed him deeply, pouring all her love into it. "This place is already perfect because you are here." Through the fall, they worked harder than ever. Lucas did take extra work, sometimes being gone for days at a time helping neighboring ranchers round up cattle or repair fences. Sarah hated being alone but understood the necessity. She used the time to work on the house herself, whitewashing the walls Lucas had built, making curtains from flour sacks, creating a home from raw materials and determination. She also wrote letters, long ones to her mother and Emily, describing every detail of her new life. Shorter ones to friends she had left behind in Missouri. And one special one to Lucas's sister Harriet, introducing herself as Lucas's wife and hoping they could become friends. When Lucas was home, they treasured every moment together. He taught her to ride his gentler horse so she could explore the land on her own. She taught him to read better, patient lessons by firelight that had him slowly improving. They talked about everything, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. One October evening, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She sat at her writing desk, hand on her stomach, mind racing. When Lucas came in from checking the cattle, she met him at the door with news that made him whoop with joy and spin her around carefully. "A baby. We are going to have a baby, I think so," Sarah said, laughing at his excitement. "In late spring, probably May." Lucas's expression turned serious. "Then I need to work even harder. We need money for a doctor, for baby things, for everything." "We will manage," Sarah assured him. "Women have been having babies on the frontier since the first settlers arrived. We will be fine." But Lucas worried. The nearest doctor was in Guthrie, hours away by wagon. What if something went wrong? What if Sarah needed help he could not provide? He began making plans obsessively. He built a larger bed frame so Sarah would be more comfortable. He brought home fabric from town for baby clothes and diapers. He talked to every married woman he could find, gathering advice on childbirth and infant care. Sarah found his protectiveness endearing, even when it became slightly overwhelming. "Lucas, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she finally said one evening when he insisted she should not carry water from the creek. "Women work through their pregnancies all the time." "Not my wife," Lucas said stubbornly. "Not if I can help it." They compromised. Sarah would continue doing lighter tasks but let Lucas handle anything strenuous. It was hard for her, independent as she was, but she appreciated that his concern came from love. Winter arrived early and harsh. Snow piled up around their house, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight. Lucas spent those months working close to home, building furniture, repairing equipment, and preparing for spring calving and planting. Sarah spent hours at her writing desk, composing letters and working on something new, a journal documenting their first year of marriage. She wrote about their struggles and triumphs, the loneliness and the love, creating a record for their future children. She also started feeling the baby move, small flutters at first, then definite kicks. Lucas would place his work-roughened hand on her growing belly at night, talking softly to the child neither of them had met yet. "I promise to protect you," he would murmur. "You and your mother are my whole world. I will work every day of my life to give you both the best life I can." Christmas was simple but perfect. Lucas surprised Sarah with a rocking chair he had built in secret, working on it while she slept. Sarah gave him a shirt she had sewn, the stitches careful and even. They had a small tree Lucas cut from the creek bank, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Sarah folded. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Lucas said, holding Sarah close by the fire. "Even better than when you were a child. Those Christmases were happy, but this is different. This is the family I chose, the life I built. That makes it special in a way nothing else could be." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Lucas finished the improvements he had promised. The house now had glass windows, a proper wooden floor, and a second bedroom for the baby. He had built a chicken coop and acquired chickens, giving Sarah fresh eggs. The garden plot was twice as large as the previous year, ready for planting. And most importantly, he had saved enough money to hire a midwife from Guthrie to come stay with them when Sarah's time arrived. Sarah's mother and sister were scheduled to visit in late April, before the baby came. Sarah was nervous about seeing them after more than a year apart, worried they would judge her choices or find her life too primitive. But when the stagecoach arrived in Guthrie, and Lucas drove Sarah to town to meet it, all her fears evaporated. Her mother Judith stepped down from the coach and burst into tears at the sight of her daughter, pregnant and glowing with health and happiness. "My baby girl," Judith sobbed, holding Sarah tight. "I thought I had lost you forever." Emily was 17 now, grown taller and prettier than Sarah remembered. She hugged her sister fiercely before turning curious eyes on Lucas. "So you are the famous cowboy who stole my sister's heart," Emily said, offering her hand. Lucas shook it solemnly. "I am the lucky man who somehow convinced her to marry me, yes, madam." Emily grinned. "He is polite. I like him already." The 2-week visit was both wonderful and stressful. Judith and Emily marveled at the house Lucas had built, the land he was working, the life Sarah and Lucas had created from nothing. But Judith also worried constantly about Sarah being so isolated, so far from medical help, working so hard in her condition. "Mother, I am happy," Sarah finally said firmly. "Yes, life is hard here. Yes, we work constantly and do not have many of the comforts we had back home. But Lucas loves me, I love him, and we are building something real together. Please try to understand." Judith looked at her daughter, really looked and saw the truth. This was not the uncertain girl who had left Missouri. This was a confident woman who had found her place and purpose. "I do understand," Judith said softly. "And I am proud of you. Your father would have been too." Emily loved everything about the frontier. She rode Lucas's horses, helped Sarah with the garden, explored the creek, and peppered Lucas with questions about cattle ranching and land management. On her last evening before returning to Missouri, she pulled Sarah aside. "I want to come back," Emily said. Maybe not permanently, but for the summer at least. Would that be acceptable? I would love that, Sarah said, hugging her sister. And I know Lucas would enjoy the company and the help. As the stagecoach pulled away with Judith and Emily aboard, Sarah cried into Lucas's shoulder. I miss them already, she sobbed. They will be back, Lucas soothed. And in a few weeks we will have our own child to focus on. Our family is just beginning, Sarah. He was right. 3 weeks later, on a warm May morning, Sarah's labor began. Lucas rode hard for Guthrie to fetch the midwife while Sarah paced the house, timing contractions. Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, was a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies. She took one look at Sarah and pronounced everything normal and progressing well. Lucas arrived back just as the labor intensified. He held Sarah's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, wiping her face with cool cloths, doing everything Mrs. Henderson instructed. As sunset painted the sky gold and pink, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Mrs. Henderson cleaned him and placed him in Sarah's arms while Lucas stared in absolute wonder. A boy, Sarah breathed, studying the tiny face. We have a son. He is perfect, Lucas said, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fist closed around it instinctively, and Lucas felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, holding their son, Sarah knew exactly what felt right. Joseph, she said softly, after my uncle who brought me west. Without him, I never would have met you. Lucas nodded, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Joseph Wright, it is a strong name. That night with Mrs. Henderson sleeping in the other room and baby Joseph swaddled in Sarah's arms, Lucas lay beside them both, one protective arm around his wife, his other hand resting gently on his son. I love you, he whispered to Sarah. Thank you for this, for him, for everything. I love you too, Sarah murmured, exhausted but happier than she had ever imagined possible. Thank you for asking me to stay and write to you all those months ago. That was the smartest thing I ever did, Lucas said, kissing her forehead gently. Little Joseph's early months were exhausting but joyful. He was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Sarah marveled at every tiny change, documenting his growth in her journal. Lucas was a devoted father, walking the floor with Joseph when he fussed, talking to him constantly, showing him the land that would one day be his. Sarah wrote detailed letters to her mother and Emily, describing every milestone. She also wrote to Lucas's sister Harriet, who had finally responded warmly to Sarah's earlier letters. Harriet sent baby clothes she had saved from her own children and promised to visit when Joseph was older. That summer was their best yet. The cattle herd had grown to nearly 50 head. The garden produced abundantly, and Sarah spent long days preserving food for the coming winter. Lucas hired a young hand named Thomas to help with the ranch work, giving him more time with Sarah and Joseph. Emily arrived in June as promised and fell immediately in love with her nephew. She was a tremendous help, entertaining Joseph while Sarah worked, helping with cooking and cleaning, even learning to milk the cow Lucas had recently acquired. I could stay here forever. Emily sighed one evening, watching the sunset from the porch while rocking Joseph. You are welcome anytime, Sarah said sincerely. But you need to live your own life too. Find your own cowboy to fall in love with. Emily laughed. If I could find one half as good as Lucas, I would be blessed. When Emily left in late August, the house felt quieter, but Sarah had little time to feel lonely. Joseph was becoming more active, rolling over and trying to sit up. Lucas was preparing for fall cattle sales. and Sarah had started something new, offering writing services to other settlers in the area. Word had spread about her skill with letters, and people began showing up at their door asking for help. Some needed letters written to family back east. Others needed help with legal documents for their land claims. A few even wanted her to teach them to read and write. Sarah charged modest fees, and the extra income was welcome. But more than that, she enjoyed using her skills to help others. It reminded her of that first night when Lucas had asked for her help, when her gift for writing had brought them together. By Joseph's first birthday in May 1891, their life had taken on a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was profitable enough to support them, though they still worked constantly. The house had been expanded again, with a larger kitchen and a proper bathing room Lucas had built as a birthday gift for Sarah. They had made friends among the neighboring settlers and were active in the small community forming around Guthrie. Sarah was also pregnant again, due in the late fall. This time there was less fear and more excitement. They knew what to expect, had resources in place, and Joseph would soon have a sibling. "I hope it is a girl this time," Lucas said one evening, hands on Sarah's growing belly. "A little girl with your beautiful eyes and kind heart." "And your stubbornness," Sarah teased. "That would serve her well on the frontier," Lucas admitted with a grin. Their daughter Margaret, named for Sarah's cousin who had died in the cholera outbreak, was born on a cold November morning. She came quickly, so quickly that Mrs. Henderson almost did not arrive in time. Lucas delivered his own daughter with shaking hands and overwhelming pride. Margaret was completely different from Joseph. Where he had been calm and content, she was fussy and demanding. But she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment. Lucas, the tough cowboy who could wrestle steers and break horses, melted completely when his daughter looked at him with those blue eyes that matched Sarah's. Juggling two children under 2 years old while managing the ranch, and Sarah's writing business stretched them both thin. But Lucas hired more help, and Sarah learned to work with Margaret strapped to her back in a carrier. An Indian woman from a nearby settlement had shown her how to make. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was theirs, built from nothing but love and hard work and determination. In the spring of 1892, 3 years after the land run that had brought Sarah to Oklahoma Territory, Judith and Emily visited again. Judith was delighted with her grandchildren, while Emily could not stop talking about a young man she had met back in Missouri. "His name is David and he works at the bank," Emily gushed. "He is kind and smart and he wants to marry me." Sarah hugged her sister, thrilled for her happiness. "When is the wedding, June, back home? I came partly to visit and partly to ask if you would come. I want you there, Sarah. You are the only sister I have." Sarah's heart sank. "Emily, I want nothing more than to be there, but the journey with 2 small children, the expense leaving the ranch." "We will make it work," Lucas said firmly. He had been listening from the doorway. "This is your sister's wedding. We will find a way." They did find a way. Lucas sold some cattle early to raise money for the trip. Thomas, now a trusted employee, agreed to manage things while they were gone. And in early June, the Wright family made the long journey by train to Missouri. It was Sarah's first time back since leaving nearly 3 years earlier, and everything seemed smaller and tamer than she remembered. The streets were orderly, the houses close together, the whole town feeling confined after the wide openness of Oklahoma Territory. But it was wonderful to see old friends and familiar places. Emily's wedding was beautiful, and David proved to be exactly as Emily had described: kind, steady, and clearly devoted to her. Sarah cried happy tears watching her baby sister marry, remembering her own simple ceremony in that rough frontier town. The 2-week visit was sweet but strange. Sarah realized she no longer belonged here. Her home was in Oklahoma Territory with Lucas, on land they were building into something lasting. Missouri was her past. The frontier was her future. Lucas felt it too. "Ready to go home?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "More than ready," Sarah admitted. "As much as I love seeing Mother and Emily, our real life is waiting for us." They returned to find everything running smoothly, the ranch thriving in their absence. Joseph, now 2 years old, ran through the house shouting happily. Margaret, nearly 7 months old, was trying to crawl. The garden needed weeding, the cattle needed checking, and there was a stack of letters waiting for Sarah from clients needing her services. It felt perfect. That fall, Lucas surprised Sarah with his most ambitious project, yet a proper barn built from milled lumber he had saved for months to purchase. It was large enough for their growing livestock herd, with a loft for hay storage and a tack room for equipment. "It is beautiful," Sarah breathed, walking through the empty structure that smelled of fresh wood and possibility. "We are really doing this," Lucas said, wonder in his voice. "Building something that will last. Something we can pass on to Joseph and Margaret and any other children we are blessed with." Sarah took his hand. "We have come so far from that night in the saloon when you asked me to write a letter for you. You were writing letters home," Lucas remembered, "looking so sad and alone. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, though I did not know it yet. And you were the lonely cowboy who asked me to stay," Sarah said, squeezing his rough hand. "You saved me, Lucas. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, and you threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected, pulling her close. "I was just as lonely, just as lost. We found each other exactly when we both needed it most." They stood together in their new barn, surrounded by everything they had built, and Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for that evening 3 years ago, for the courage to say yes, for the love that had grown from such a simple beginning. The years that followed were full of both struggles and triumphs. There were droughts that withered crops and forced them to sell cattle. There were harsh winters that tested their endurance. There was sickness that frightened them, accidents that could have been tragic, and the constant, grinding work that frontier life demanded. But there were also good years when the cattle multiplied and the garden flourished. There were neighbors who became friends, helping each other through hard times. There was Joseph growing tall and strong, learning to ride almost before he could walk. There was Margaret developing her mother's love of words and her father's stubborn determination. In 1894, Sarah gave birth to twin boys they named Daniel and Samuel. Lucas joked that they now had enough children to run the ranch themselves. Sarah, exhausted but happy, said they were done having babies. But in 1897, a final surprise came in the form of another daughter, Helen, who had her father's hazel eyes and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. With 5 children, the house that had once seemed spacious now bulged at the seams. Lucas expanded it again, adding a second story with 3 bedrooms. He also built a schoolroom attached to the house where Sarah taught not only their own children, but also children from neighboring ranches. Sarah's writing business had evolved into something larger. She was now helping settlers with legal documents, writing articles for the territorial newspaper about farming and ranching life, and even corresponding with government officials about improving mail service and education in the territory. Her desk had become her command center, where she managed her growing responsibilities while still finding time to write personal letters to family and friends. Lucas's ranch had grown from those original 160 acres to over 800 through careful purchases and trades with neighbors. His cattle herd numbered in the hundreds, and he had earned a reputation as one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. But success had not changed him. He was still the quiet, hard-working man who had approached a sad girl in a saloon and asked her to write him a letter. In the fall of 1902, 13 years after that fateful meeting, Sarah sat at her writing desk finishing a letter to Emily, who now had 4 children of her own and still lived in Missouri with David. Joseph, now 11, was helping his father repair fence lines. Margaret, at 10, was practicing her letters, already showing signs of inheriting her mother's gift. The twins, 8 years old, were supposedly doing chores but were likely causing mischief somewhere. And Helen, 5 years old, was sitting on the floor playing with a set of wooden animals Lucas had carved for her. Lucas came in from the fields as the sun was setting, dusty and tired but smiling when he saw his family. He kissed Sarah's cheek, ruffled Helen's hair, and praised Margaret's handwriting before washing up for dinner. As they all sat around the large table Lucas had built to accommodate their growing family, Sarah looked at each face and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This life, these people, this love, it had all started because a lonely cowboy had noticed a sad girl writing letters and had found the courage to speak to her. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, catching her expression. "Everything," Sarah said softly. "How far we have come. How blessed we are. I thank God every day that you said yes when I asked you to write that first letter," Lucas said, his eyes warm with love that had only deepened over the years. "Best decision you ever made was helping that rough cowboy who could barely write his own name." "The best decision I ever made was falling in love with you," Sarah corrected. "The letter writing was just the excuse that brought us together." That night, after the children were asleep and they lay together in the bed they had shared for 13 years, Lucas pulled Sarah close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going back to Missouri? All the hardships, the work, the isolation sometimes." "Never," Sarah said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly the person I am supposed to be with. You are my home, Lucas. You have been since that first night when you asked me to stay and write to you. And you are mine," Lucas murmured, kissing her softly. "My Sarah, my love, my whole heart." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination, and the simple act of one lonely person reaching out to another. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Joseph grew into a fine young man who loved ranching as much as his father. Margaret discovered a passion for teaching and took over much of her mother's educational work. The twins developed distinct personalities: Daniel calm and thoughtful like his father, Samuel energetic and charming. Helen remained everyone's favorite, her sunny nature brightening the darkest days. Oklahoma Territory became the state of Oklahoma in 1907, and Lucas and Sarah celebrated by hosting a huge gathering at their ranch. Neighbors came from miles around, along with Sarah's family from Missouri. Judith, now in her 60s, marveled at the empire her daughter and son-in-law had built. "You did well for yourself," Judith told Sarah, watching Lucas show Joseph's fiancée around the ranch. "That cowboy of yours turned out to be quite something." "I always knew he would," Sarah said with a smile. "From the very first night, I could see what kind of man he was. I just had to learn to trust what I saw." Joseph's wedding in the spring of 1908 was the first of many. He married a sweet girl named Rebecca from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the western portion of Lucas and Sarah's land. Margaret married a schoolteacher from Guthrie the following year and moved to town, though she visited often. The twins both found brides within a year of each other, and Helen, the baby, finally married in 1915 to a young man who had come west seeking adventure and found love instead. With all their children married and starting their own families, Lucas and Sarah found themselves alone together for the first time in decades. The house felt huge and quiet with just the two of them. "What should we do with ourselves now?" Sarah joked one evening. "We have spent 25 years raising children and building this ranch. What comes next? Grandchildren," Lucas said with a grin, "and enjoying the fruits of all that hard work, maybe even taking some time just for us." They did exactly that. They traveled to Missouri to visit Emily and her family. They took a trip to Tennessee to finally meet Lucas's sister Harriet, who welcomed them with open arms. They spent long afternoons riding across their land together, remembering the early days when it had been just empty prairie and big dreams. But mostly, they enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together, playing checkers by the fire in winter, sitting on their porch watching storms roll across the prairie in summer, reading books aloud to each other, writing letters to their children and grandchildren, now scattered across Oklahoma and beyond. In 1914, 25 years after that night in the saloon, Sarah surprised Lucas by presenting him with a leather-bound book. "What is this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "Open it." Inside was Sarah's journal, the one she had started that first year of their marriage. She had continued it faithfully, documenting their lives together. But she had also added something: copies of every letter they had written over the years, the ones she had written for Lucas to his sister, the ones he had dictated to various ranch owners and business associates, even that very first letter that had brought them together. "Our story," Sarah said softly. "I thought you might want to read it, see how far we have come." Lucas spent the next week reading every word. He laughed at some of his early, awkward attempts at expressing himself. He cried at Sarah's descriptions of Joseph's birth and Margaret's first day of school. He marveled at the sheer volume of correspondence they had generated, all those words connecting them to the wider world despite their isolation. When he finished, he pulled Sarah into his arms and held her tight. 25 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. 25 years since I worked up the courage to talk to the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I was so nervous, Sarah. Thought you would tell me to go away, that you had no time for a rough cowboy who could barely string 2 words together. I saw through the rough exterior immediately, Sarah admitted. I saw your kind heart, your loneliness that matched mine, your genuine desire to connect with someone. How could I say no? I am so grateful you did not, Lucas said, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown 25 years earlier. You made my whole life worth living. The years after were golden. Grandchildren arrived regularly, filling the house with noise and laughter during visits. The ranch continued to thrive under Joseph's management, allowing Lucas to step back and enjoy life more. Sarah's writing evolved into memoir work, helping elderly settlers record their memories of the land run and early territorial days for historical societies. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1919, surrounded by all 5 children, their spouses, and 14 grandchildren ranging from babies to teenagers. Looking around at the gathering, Sarah was overwhelmed by the legacy they had created. All of this started because you asked me to stay and write to you, she told Lucas that night. One simple request that changed everything. I think we would have found our way to each other somehow, Lucas said. Some things are just meant to be, but I am grateful it happened the way it did. Every letter, every word, every moment has been a gift. In 1924, 35 years after they met, Lucas began having health problems. His heart, the doctor said, weakened from decades of hard physical labor. He was 70 now, Sarah 64, and they had lived full, rich lives. But the thought of losing each other was unbearable to both. Sarah refused to let him see her fear. Instead, she wrote. She wrote letters to each of their children, telling them how proud she was. She wrote to their grandchildren, sharing wisdom and family stories. And she wrote to Lucas, even though he was right there beside her, putting into words everything her heart felt. Lucas, true to form, dictated responses that Sarah wrote down, his voice weaker but his love as strong as ever. On a quiet spring morning in 1925, Lucas passed away peacefully in their bed with Sarah holding his hand. His last words were simple, "Thank you for staying." Sarah's grief was profound but not bitter. They had been given 36 years together, 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and a love that had sustained them through everything the frontier could throw at them. Not everyone was so blessed. She continued living in the house Lucas built, writing letters, welcoming grandchildren, and slowly adding to the family history she had documented so carefully. On quiet evenings, she would sit at her desk, the same one Lucas had built into their first real house, and read through their letters, remembering. Joseph and Rebecca moved into the main house to care for her, and Sarah spent her final years surrounded by family and love. She watched Joseph run the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown. She taught great-grandchildren to read and write. She finished the family memoir, ensuring their story would not be forgotten. On a summer evening in 1930, 69-year-old Sarah Vaughn Wright sat at her beloved desk one last time. She wrote a final letter addressed to no one and everyone, to be opened after her death. In it, she wrote about love and courage and taking chances. About a lonely cowboy and a sad girl writing letters home. About building a life from nothing but hard work and determination. About the miracle of finding exactly the right person at exactly the right time. She wrote, "To anyone reading this, remember that life can change in an instant. One conversation, one kind word, one person willing to see you and really listen, that is all it takes. Lucas asked me to stay and write to him, and I said yes. That simple yes led to a lifetime of love and joy I could never have imagined. Do not be afraid to say yes to love. Do not be afraid to reach out to that lonely person who needs connection. Do not be afraid to trust that good things can grow from the smallest seeds." Our whole family, this whole legacy, started with a cowboy who noticed a girl writing letters and cared enough to ask why. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles. She sealed the letter and placed it in the journal, knowing her children would find it. Then she went to bed in the room she had shared with Lucas for so many years, their wedding photograph on the bedside table, and slipped away peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was attended by over 200 people. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends from across Oklahoma came to pay their respects to the woman who had helped so many find their words, who had built a legacy of love and family through her simple gift for writing. The letter was read aloud by Margaret, tears streaming down her 71-year-old face. There was not a dry eye in the gathering. Joseph stood afterward and spoke about his parents, about the story he had heard his whole life about how they met. About his father, the lonely cowboy who fell in love with a sad girl writing letters. About his mother who said yes and changed all their lives. "They showed us what real love looks like," Joseph said. "Not the easy romance of storybooks, but the hard, beautiful work of building a life together. Of choosing each other every day through good times and bad. Of creating something lasting through dedication and faith and stubbornness." The family buried Sarah next to Lucas on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The gravestone was simple. Sarah Vaughn Wright, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she had a gift for words and a heart full of love. The ranch continued through the generations. Joseph's children took it over, then their children after them. The original house Lucas built was preserved, Sarah's desk still in place, her journals and letters carefully stored and treasured. Every generation learned the story of the lonely cowboy and the girl writing letters home, of the simple question that started everything. Would you be willing to write a letter for me? It became family legend, told and retold at weddings and anniversaries and family gatherings. Young women in the family would sit at Sarah's desk and practice their writing, feeling connected to the grandmother or great-grandmother who had started it all. Young men learned that real courage meant being vulnerable enough to reach out, to express feelings, to ask for help. In 1989, exactly 100 years after the land run that brought Sarah to Oklahoma Territory, the Wright family held a massive reunion on the ranch. Over 300 descendants of Lucas and Sarah gathered to celebrate their legacy. The oldest was 92, Joseph and Rebecca's eldest daughter. The youngest was just 3 weeks old, named Sarah after her great-great-great-grandmother. Someone had found and framed that very first letter Sarah wrote for Lucas, to his sister Harriet. It hung in a place of honor in the old house, a reminder of where everything started. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the words were still clear. Sarah's flowing script as beautiful as ever. Standing before it, Joseph and Rebecca's grandson gave a toast. To Lucas and Sarah, he said, raising his glass. Who taught us that love begins with courage, that reaching out to another person, really seeing them and caring about their story, can change everything. That from the smallest beginning, the greatest things can grow. They started with nothing but each other and built all of this. We are the living proof that love and hard work can create miracles. To Lucas and Sarah, the gathered family chorused, voices ringing out across the land those two had claimed and cultivated and loved. And if you listened very carefully in the twilight, you might have heard an echo of laughter on the wind, the sound of a cowboy and his beloved girl, still together in spirit, still watching over the legacy they created with nothing but love and letters and the courage to say yes to each other on a spring evening in 1889, when the world was young, and anything seemed possible for two lonely souls who found exactly what they needed in each other. Their story became more than just family legend. It was recorded in historical societies as an example of frontier romance and determination. Scholars studying the settlement of Oklahoma Territory interviewed descendants and studied Sarah's extensive journals and letters. The correspondence Sarah and Lucas maintained with family and business associates provided valuable historical insight into life in early Oklahoma. But to their family, the story was simpler and more profound. It was about two people who took a chance on love when everything else in their lives felt uncertain, about building something lasting in a harsh environment, about the power of words to connect people and create understanding, about saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. The ranch that Lucas claimed in the 1889 land run remained in the family for over a century, eventually becoming a historic site where visitors could tour the original house, see Sarah's famous writing desk, and learn the story of the lonely cowboy and the girl writing letters home. School children would visit and write their own letters at replica desks, learning about frontier life and the importance of maintaining connections with loved ones. In the small museum housed in the barn Lucas built in 1891, his great-great-grandson worked as curator, preserving the family legacy for future generations. He would tell visitors about that night in the saloon when everything changed, about the letters that brought two lonely souls together, about the love that sustained them through 36 years of marriage and continued to inspire their descendants generations later. And late at night, when the tourists had gone and the ranch was quiet, he would sometimes sit at Sarah's original desk and imagine her there, pen in hand, writing letters that connected people across vast distances. He would think about Lucas, the tough cowboy who was brave enough to show vulnerability, to ask for help, to risk rejection in pursuit of connection. Their story was proof that the smallest acts of courage could have the biggest impacts. That love was worth fighting for. That two people who truly saw and valued each other could create something beautiful that would outlast them by generations. From that one evening in 1889, from one simple request to write a letter, had come 5 children, dozens of grandchildren, hundreds of descendants, and a legacy of love that showed no signs of ending. The Wright family continued to grow and thrive, spreading across Oklahoma and beyond. But they all traced their roots back to that moment when Sarah Vaughn said yes to Lucas Wright, and everything changed. It was a love story for the ages, proof that even in the hardest times and roughest places, love could flourish and grow and create miracles. The lonely cowboy had found his home in the sad girl writing letters, and together they had built not just a ranch, not just a family, but a legacy that would endure as long as their descendants remembered to reach out with courage and kindness, to see the lonely souls around them, and to believe in the transformative power of love and human connection.